Today's episode is brought to you by Social RV. Quick question. Have you ever thought about someone and then they suddenly text you? Or had a gut feeling about something and it turned out you were right? A lot of people have had moments like that. Social RV is an app that lets you actually test that kind of intuition. It's built around something called remote viewing, where you try to describe a place or object without seeing it first. The app gives you a completely random target. You write down the impressions that come to you, and then the target is revealed. Think of it like a workout for your sixth sense. Then Social RV uses AI scoring to show how closely your impressions match the target. If you're curious whether you might have a little extra perception going on, try it for free at social-rv.com/home. One of my greatest privileges in hosting this podcast is getting to sit with and be in conversation with people who actually shape and impact my internal landscape and awareness of how I think about myself and the world. So today I have an extra special guest, someone whose podcast I've listened to for years, and it's one of my favorites. The way I would describe his podcast is like listening to a beautiful soundscape that has moments of Dharma talk that remind you of things that you already know but really need to hear in that moment, that bring you solace and help you see things from an expanded aerial view and vantage point, and reconnects you to your body. So there's a felt experience and journey that you go through that also ties you into the cosmos and to your landscape and into nature. So today I'm joined by Josh Schrei, who is the host and the creator of the Emerald podcast. As a somatic therapist, I see on a daily basis how cultural conditioning and traumatic events shape people and create a disconnection and a deadening in their system and a disconnection from nature. And Josh's podcast is an antidote to this. He helps us re-engage with the consciousness and in the wholeness of all things. What if those moments of annihilation are actually an opportunity for a somatic rehearsal of death? What if each exhale is the opportunity to be with that form of letting go? So you don't want to miss the exercise that we do at the end of this episode because it's profound. I want everyone to remember it's never too late to start liberating the stuck energy in your body. And technically, that's one of the ways that I hold healing, is that's what it is. It's like, how do we start to live a fuller, more alive and vibrant existence? And remembering that everyone is starting at a different place, and so work at a different pace. And so for one person, there might be like a slow trickle of energy or sensation that they start to allow through their system. And somebody else, it can be like these huge, big eruptions and openings, and neither are good or bad. And Josh provides a map for how to start to understand your experience outside of conventional wisdom and dominant cultures' perceptions, and also the pathologizing view of Western psychology. I want to encourage you also, if there's something that comes up that you don't fully understand, use this as an opportunity and an invitation to look it up. Deepen your awareness and take your curiosity and put it into action. For anyone looking to bridge the gap between ancient myth and wisdom and the nervous system, I highly recommend you check out Josh's podcast. Welcome, Josh.
Learn how to live embodied. Your life is about to unwind. Uncover new tools and start healing. Leave trauma and tension behind. Isn't it great laid open? Let all your desires come true. How can you
I'm really, really thrilled to have you here today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. It's great to be here and happy to be having a conversation together.
Yeah. There are so many things that I would like to talk about with you. And I want to, for the listeners who are new to what you're offering, they may have a really base level, because somatics is such a buzzword, they may have a really base level understanding of what somatics is. And so beyond the mind, body, spirit, and emotions interconnected, when you're thinking about somatics as it relates to the work that you're producing in the world, what would you say about it?
Well, the podcast is called The Emerald, and one of the reasons it's called The Emerald is because it's referencing an old alchemical text, a tablet, the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. And on that tablet, it says, as above, so below, and it also says, as within, so without. And what this means, simply, there's lots of levels in which we can explore this, but what that means simply is that, say, the cycles of nature that are present all around us are reflective also of cycles that take place within us. So we are as the world around us is, and our navigation of this cosmos is a navigation of seasonal cycles, of lunar cycles, of all these varying cycles of environment and ecology, but that is also reflected within us. It is felt within us. Consciousness itself tends to move and shift and pulse in cycles the same way that seasonal cycles pulse, the same way that cycles between day and night pulse. So there's a great continuity between the body and the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And when we explore things like myth and story, we are exploring things that aren't just taking place in some fantastical other world. We're exploring cycles of nature, and we're exploring cycles that take place within the body itself. For example, there can be a story like the ancient Greek story of Persephone, in which the main character goes through a process of descent, a journey into the underworld, and then comes out the other side and rises again with the dawn and with the coming of springtime. And this story is a story of the changing of the seasons, but it's also a story of the internal felt journey of human beings. We have times when we descend and we need to go into deep, dark spaces of hibernation and replenishment and rejuvenation. And then we have times when we're much more rising and out there and forward. And so somatics, understanding that, the cycles of the world all around us are also reflected in our bodies, and that as we work with our bodies, we are working with our presence in the world, that all of this is connected and there's continuity. This is, I guess, what I mean when I talk about somatics.
Beautiful, right? I often, when I'm talking with clients, I may talk about a season that we're going through, right? So it's taking that, and it's the embodied version of that, of really relating the felt experience. That I think a lot about my garden. That's another point of reference, right? So thinking about the cycles of nature and weather and everything that's happening around us, and how much we can feel that in our systems. It's a pretty common understanding that the moon can affect, like, the tide of a woman's cycle, for instance, but a lot of people don't think beyond that unless they're connected to a more animistic relationship to life.
Yeah, and we're in a constant process of negotiating those cycles. This entire life is about those rhythms and pulses and cycles. And we get, especially in the modern world, we get into patterns of increased pace and rush and trying to produce and trying to move forward and trying to, accomplish life and this
Right.
type of thing. And if we look at nature all around us, nature operates in seasonal cycles. Nature operates in pulses of day and night. It operates in pulses of expansion and withdrawal over and over again. You can see this in the life cycle of every creature. And for human beings, that might mean like reconnecting to a different pace of being. It might mean asking ourselves, what does it mean to be more aligned to the larger cycles that are going on around me? What does it mean to honor the winter time? What does it mean to, take time to hibernate? What does it mean to, sometimes we go through what's called a dark night of the soul, right? Those dark nights of the soul are actually incredibly important. They're not to be shunned. They are part of existence. They're part of the journey of life. If everything was all on, all up, all forward, all, accomplishment, all production all the time, the universe would be like a giant 7-Eleven, but always open. But that's not how it works. It exists in pulses so that we can start to connect and align our individual pulses of being to what is happening around us.
Yeah, it's tricky when people, and it's a very common thing in North America, to have our identities very much invested and attached to a constant cycle of production. And God forbid that slows down or we go through a period of shedding or the dark night of the soul. It completely disrupts our ego and our sense of who we are and how we are in the world. And it's groundless, right? It's like, how do you orient? And so I specifically work a lot with trauma. And so for somebody who is stuck in a certain phase of that cycle of, let's say, like feeling scattered, or it's gone through a recent experience of annihilation, what myth do you turn towards? What practices would support them in coming back together or making more peace with that process?
Yeah, if you look at traditional systems, they have a ritual calendar throughout the year, so that at varying points of the year, and this can be a seasonal calendar, it can be a lunar calendar, but there are dedicated times throughout the year where group ceremony and group ritual takes place. And that ceremony and ritual exists to reconnect us, and it exists to move us through things that we might be going through. And it exists to allow us to connect with others and repattern and reweave together with them. And so there's a deep wisdom in having life constructed around this type of ritual calendar, because it provides an ongoing way to move through, process, repattern, all of the things that life, it has for us. So that, so that like if a person is scattered, or they're coming apart a little bit, or they've gone through a period of loss, within that calendar and within that ritual system, they're taken on a journey, and that journey allows them to feel what they need to feel in relation to what they've, been going through. But it also allows them to repattern some of that and to gain communal support around it, and to reach states of altered consciousness, because ritual very much exists to take us into states of altered consciousness. And in those states of altered consciousness that are achieved through singing, through chanting, through dancing, through repetitive ritual behavior of some kind or another, science has found that in those permeable, malleable states, things can be repatterned very effectively. So, ritual, for those who are new to ritual is fundamental and foundational to human beings. It's integral part of how our ancestors reconnected and connected to the world around them. And it's not just like, oh, we're doing some celebration around an imaginary story and this type of thing. It is about we are directly enacting our communal relationship and individual relationship to each other and to the ecology around us and to the greater cycles of being, the greater seasonal cycles of the cosmos, all of these cycles. It provides the opportunity for us to repattern. Now, people these days don't always have access to like a thriving community of ritual practitioners, but one, it's something that we can start to hold as a goal to find that community. And two, we can start to practice, on our own in whatever tradition we feel called to or compelled to, or, whatever tradition we're currently in. We can start to make a regular practice of that direct, and this is another reason why I use the word somatic, direct, felt, embodied connection to something. Direct, felt, embodied connection. So we're not going to go through that process that you're talking about, that process of like coalescing after fragmentation, or that process of, drawing in towards center after, being scattered. We're not going to go through that process simply by thinking about it.
Yeah.
This is something that the Western world needs to, I think, really, the modern Western world needs to really grasp.
Yeah.
We don't just get there by thinking about it. And this is the other side of why I use that word somatic.
Yeah.
It can help to talk about it. It can help to do things like talk therapy and that kind of thing. But we are beings of enactment. Ritual is enactment. Ritual, which eventually leads to theater. Like this is the basic human need for enactment. We need to take ourselves on a transformational journey in order to embody the actual transformation that we want to see. And that can sound more complicated than it is. It's as simple as singing or chanting or dancing. It can be through silent meditation, though silent meditation traditionally also includes practices of chanting and singing. It can be through simple group activity around, the full moon or around the new moon or around the equinox or the solstice or around a particular story. Whatever it is, it has to give us the opportunity to actually enact and go into a more malleable state of consciousness so that things can actually start to be repatterned and rewoven. And this is part of the wisdom of traditional ritual. It is trauma work, even though it doesn't have to name itself as trauma work, because you are constantly doing this type of reconnection, repatterning, reestablishing of your relationship with others, reestablishing of your relationship with the forest and the stones and the trees and the seasonal cycles, reestablishing your relationship with the mysterious source of everything. So that's the wisdom in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the ways that I work with clients is using martial arts-based practices. And so through the physical repetition, like building, rewiring the brain through the body and creating new imprints. And that's when I think of like repeatedly engaging with something, the importance of whether it's a daily ritual or that it's the reinforcing so that during times like right now, it's so stressful in the collective that we're not going to reach for those resources if they're not practiced in us, right? If it's not embodied, if it's not the habit, we're going to default to what we know most. And so I think of how important it is, and it's, you spoke to it, that people don't always have those communities, but this now is the time. This is a call to action to establish those communities. And they, like you said, they don't have to be so elaborate or complex. It could be a singing circle. Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
In times of fracture and disconnect, when the sources of our information about the world are getting less and less trustworthy, I think that people are going to naturally be called and urgently be called towards finding and coalescing in groups of practice community. I think there's no doubt about it. Like the general agitation that exists in the world over all that's happening, and the degree to which our social forms of communication have become what I would call a deeply compromised space.
It's a nice way of putting it.
It's going to call people into what human beings have always known, which is. Go ahead.
Do you think, so I've thought about this, and, years ago listening to your podcast, I would have thought about Trump as the trickster in a nice way, like, oh, what AI or Trump, how they serve to, or even the creator destroyer, like the function of these players or these myths in leveling something so that something new can be built, or giving us the opportunity to come together in response to what's not working. How are you framing things consistently for yourself?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because people talk, like, certainly when societies reach certain points, there comes a need for cultural refresh, and there comes a need to topple old orders and to have things refreshed and regenerated. And this is a role that in traditional systems, Trickster has always played. Trickster is the culture disruptor. He's the one who comes along and says, oh, you've gotten a little bit too married to your form of discourse and your way of talking about things and your sacred cows and your, statements of this is absolutely positively how it is. And I'm here to kind of poke at that, and I'm here to disrupt. And because of that disruption, what had been a stasis in the culture then gets the opportunity for change and for renewal. So people look at what's going on now, and they're like, maybe in the past few months they may have changed their tune a little bit, but they look at the forces at play in the country, and they can see Trump kind of acting in this tricksterish kind of way. And I certainly think that there are aspects of what he's bringing that are trickster-like in nature. The important thing to remember is that Trickster is not good and Trickster is not bad. Trickster is the force of cultural disruption and change.
Yeah.
America has built up for itself, great structures of karma, one could say, great orders and ways of doing things and ways of being in the world, and ignoring aspects of how its own citizens are doing, and all this kind of stuff that is built up for years and years and years in the United States that one can see obviously needs shaking up.
So hold right there. We'll be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Social RV. Social RV is an app built around social remote viewing. If you've never heard of remote viewing, it's the practice of trying to perceive information about a distant place, object, or event without using your normal senses. Social RV basically lets you treat that ability like a workout for your sixth sense. The app gives you a completely random target from a pool of hundreds. You write down the impressions that come to you, submit your session, and then the target is revealed. From there, the platform uses automated AI scoring and statistics to show how closely your impressions matched the target and how likely that result would be by chance. You can also explore other people's sessions and see how everyone interpreted the same target. The goal is to build the largest open data set of verifiable, blind remote viewing sessions so skeptics and believers alike can look at the results for themselves. If you're curious or just want to try something fascinating, check out social-rv.com/home. It's completely free to use.
Obviously needs change, obviously needs disruption. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to say that, Trump is performing a good, quote unquote, service by doing it. it's like the culture disruptor. Yes, right now I see there is opportunity for change and movement in the United States like there rarely
Yeah.
has been in my life. But there's also a lot that comes with that that's deeply, incredibly scary. So
Hmm.
there's a reason that Trickster is treated incredibly carefully in cultures.
Yeah.
And, Trickster is treated carefully because it's like, you know, if you're on the left for years and years and years, you wished for a kind of culture disruption. It's like, well, now we're getting culture disruption, but it certainly
Hmm.
didn't come from the place that the left
Hmm.
thought it was going to come
Hmm.
from. And Trickster, it's always like, careful what you wish for. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, great. There are certain ways that the old order has been that we want to topple. Well, the time period of toppling orders is not comfortable and it's not
Yeah.
pretty. And there's a lot that goes on that sometimes what comes next can be worse than what was before. And that's the
Hmm.
danger of like toppling the system as kind of like,
Hmm.
okay, let's topple the system. Well, what are we going to replace that with? I mean, I was deeply
Yeah.
reminded of this recently, checking out an old Persian text called the Book of Kings,
Hmm.
which kind of goes through like all of the varying iterations of like, well, this one came and here were the qualities of that, and then this one came and here were the qualities of that.
Hmm.
And, right now there's a big movement that says no kings, which I think is understandable, but is also an incomplete statement because it's
Hmm.
like if you topple one thing, well, okay, no kings. Well, what's next? And are we ready for that? Really? And are we ready?
Hmm.
You know, and
Hmm.
so I think seeing these all as forces of change, as cycles, like we're talking about,
Hmm.
cycles of nature. And yes, when something builds up and gets too unwieldy, of course it's going to topple at a certain point.
Hmm.
And, when something pushes too far this way, of course there's going to be pushback this way. And seeing this less in terms of good and bad, I released a little video yesterday that was critical about some things that Trump is doing right now. That doesn't mean that I am going to assign the categorical term bad to everything that's happening right now,
Hmm.
in the world. It means being able to look beyond our want to, assign everything the deepest moral value and look instead at the actual waves of change that are happening and how they're happening. And, you know, like I said, Trickster is not a good or bad figure. Trickster comes at times of disruption. So I think that we're in times of deep disruption, cultural
Yeah.
disruption.
Yeah.
I think that in such times, it's funny, somebody asked me recently, like, what does it mean to be counterculture? Counterculture for a long time meant certain things.
Hmm.
Now I think it means almost kind of the opposite. Like counterculture to me, it's like if the overarching push right now
Hmm.
is like more anxiousness, anxiety, get pushed into that internet rabbit hole, produce, like all this kind of stuff, then to be counterculture is like found through models that take time
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
models of deepening
Yeah.
and study that isn't like I can master this thing in 8 weeks and go change the world and become a um like frog medicine Instagram influencer in like 5 minutes. And like you know counterculture might be like, no, if you want to study a system, like go study it for the next 10 years and really deepen into it. And like you know counterculture might be reclaiming some of the deep old ways of being and not um kind of buying into the endless frenetic cycles of like consume and then put out there and
Right.
consume and put out there. Counterculture might be like we've been talking about, us having a singing circle that is our normal way of anchoring throughout each and every month. It expresses in many ways. So I think that it's important to look at, what modernity on all sides is kind of funneling us towards, like, you know, doom and gloom over the, inevitable cataclysm that is going to come on one hand,
Mm-hmm.
or like, rise to the top of the corporate ladder on the other hand, or our inevitable destiny is to move to Mars on the other hand. All of these contain within them a stress, an urgency, a somewhat apocalyptic vision. And this is present on the left and the right. It's
Yeah.
present across all sides of the political spectrum. And I think counterculture, if we really want to act counter to that, then we have to deepen and grow deeper roots and
Yeah.
come into systems with a lot more depth, to use that word again.
The episode on carrying the burden, I found solace in one of the things that you were talking about. My system is more upward, and my life's path is learning how to go down, like learning how to ground more and root more. And so my system, it's like, in taking in the news and taking in the collective, I tend towards chronic migraines, right? Just the energy goes to my head. So thinking about Ganesha and doing like a self-guided, created ritual of picturing Ganesha across from me, sitting on the earth, like breathing into my own belly and my own pelvis, which is something I, of course, guide my clients through all the time, but I also need that reminder. And I found your episode and imagining that, that I could take this burden and not have to hold it on myself, because I have definitely lived with that feeling of responsibility my whole life, like born into that responsibility, and being able to like have the even the momentary relief of handing it over and feeling like something bigger than me is helping me hold that. And I think that we can just get so focused in this like individualistic culture, like, not only like I'm gonna do it myself, but like the weight of that responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine from India, and we were talking about some of the differences in the way perhaps that modern Westerners view the goddess and the way that she is viewed in India. And one of the things that she said that I found really interesting is like, she's like, yeah, I feel like people in the modern West are like invoking the goddess because they want to like be the badass. They want to be the like thunderbolt wielding Kali who's going to like create all the change and everything. And she's like, we invoke the goddess because we want her to take care of all that. And we trust, once we turn ourselves over to her, that she's going to take care of it.
Yeah.
We trust that the universe is going to take care of it. And that doesn't mean to not take individual responsibility for, activism and being active in the world and trying to make change. Of course not. But it is a key thing in understanding what I would call the modern Western mind, which is very geared towards this sense that it is on each individual to make their mark and uplift the cosmos and save the world and be the ones who, instigate the change that is going to separate the heavens from the upper world from the lower world. And in many animate traditions, like, this isn't necessarily the human role. Like, humans can do some. We can do some in this tiny little life that we have. We have time to do some good. We have time to hold each other close. We have time to plant what we need to plant so that the next generations can benefit from it. We have time to take action when we need to take action and to protest when we need to protest. But, this life is small and this universe is vast. And remembering that we are supported by vast forces and upheld by vast forces, and that it's not all on us. It never has been on us. We can do what we can. We can't do more than that. And that, I think, it's a source of deep, deep agitation in the modern Western world. And I think to start to move through that a little bit and reweave that a little bit is a source of deep, deep relief for modern souls.
Truly, I'm feeling it right now as you're speaking, and yeah, This brings me to another question. Some people are more porous than others. Like Western medicine might call it, or psychology might call it, like being a physical empath. So there's feeling the energy that flows through your own personal story, your own ancestral story. Then there's feeling the collective and feeling the collective pain body or something, and that energy that flows through. And sometimes for some people it lands in their bodies physically. And what would you say to those people in terms of when there's great upheaval that's happening in the world? A nice reframe is thinking about it as like being in someone else's myth. Like if we think about our individual lives as like there's a mythological story unfolding, but then suddenly you're in a space with someone and their story is living in your body momentarily, and you're feeling the experience that they're not owning, they're not, consciously putting out of their own body. What are ways to work with that through ritual or practice?
Yeah, I'll say a few things from my perspective, but the very first thing I'll say is that we all need to be very careful with how we're staying informed. A lot of the felt agitated upheaval that we are feeling has to do with the medium through which we are staying informed about what's going on in the world. Doesn't mean I'm saying don't be informed. What it means, or that we shouldn't be feeling a lot around what's going on in the world, of course we will be. But it means, especially for porous people, for sensitive people, if your way of staying informed is to doom scroll, if your way of staying informed is to go on Instagram and bombard yourself with horrifying imagery, then combined with the next image is your friend's family, and the next image is your, crockery set you've been wanting to buy for your kitchen, and then oops, it's back to scenes of devastation from Gaza, and then it's everyone's take on the devastation, and this isn't a holistic way of actually being able to somatically process information.
Yeah.
I want to stay informed on what's going on in the world. I want to stay informed on what's going on right now in Iran, for example.
Yeah.
The means through which I stay informed can determine a lot about the effect on my particular system. And a lot of times in the modern world, in modern discourse, you hear this well, if you're not upheaved and you're not completely agitated, and if you're not in a constant state of despair, then you're not paying attention, and this kind of thing. Well, I look to the examples of animate traditions, mythic traditions, ritual traditions everywhere for all time, and they wouldn't necessarily see it this way from what I've studied. In other words, one can be, I feel hurt for the state of the world. I feel despair sometimes. I feel grief. I want to turn that into action, and I do, But what I really work hard to do is to cultivate what in many animate traditions would be called forms of guardianship and forms of spiritual self-defense. And, that means paying really close attention to boundary, paying really close attention to what we let in and what we let out. We have a spirituality in the modern world that is very focused on openness. Openness but you're not spiritual if you're not open, right? Openness is kind of the defining quality of spirituality in many circles. Well, if you look at animate traditions, openness is part of it, and the other part of it is closeness.
Yeah.
There are literal practices, like in the Afro-Brazilian traditions, for example, like literal practices of called fechado corpo, like closing off the body so that it's not so susceptible to, agitating forces, obsessive forces, as they call it, like things that might get in and really disrupt us on the level that, like, we can barely even be like functional for our families and our friends and this type of thing. And this isn't any good to anyone. It's not like, you're not helping the people in Gaza or Iran or Minneapolis or wherever. You're not helping them by being in a state of complete upheaval that doesn't allow you to even interact with friends and family in a cohesive manner. Like, and again, I understand, that we express through feeling, and because there is so much going on, we are going to be feeling a lot. Of course we are, but that doesn't mean also that we can't start to develop some, these traditions, these traditions of animacy and of guardianship were cultivated and developed by people for whom life was unpredictable. Life often threw you deep curveballs and found yourself in situations where you weren't in control and all this kind of thing. And that's the whole point. It's like, animacy, it's like this type of ritual work or animate work isn't just for like when things are going wonderfully well. And no, it is specifically for times of upheaval. It is so that when upheaval might come, we have carefully worked to cultivate what you could call an individual and communal and ecological architecture that can withstand times of trouble, that can repel what it needs to repel and allow in what it needs to allow in. And this is this discernment. I'm doing an upcoming episode on illusion and navigating illusion in the internet age. This type of discernment is extremely necessary right now. What we expose ourselves to and how, what we enter into discourse and negotiation around and how. Like, the number one way that I see that people are being inundated through, and getting deeply agitated and upheaved themselves, the number one way is through social media scrolling. It's through like exposing ourselves to disembodied, decontextualized, flashing, luminous, sonic bits of content that are all playing on, the deep proclivities of consciousness towards that which is luminous and that has sound to it and everything. It is playing with our psyches on such a deep level that we need to have consciousness in how we navigate this. So guardianship is a good thing. I had a funny interaction one time with a kind of self-proclaimed shaman who walked up to me and, kind of diagnosed the energetic state of my being without me asking.
And nice of him. How generous.
Her, actually. And she said, I feel like your heart is really guarded. And she meant it like in a negative way. And I said, thank you. Yeah. My heart is guarded. It is open and I seek to have it open and guarded at the same time.
Beautiful.
Like, it's good to have a guarded heart.
Yeah.
Guarded doesn't mean contracted. It doesn't mean like, like we're, somehow emotionally less because it's contracted. No, guarded means we have a good ability to discern what we want to let in and what we don't. And that, that is the navigation of the world of duality that we live in, which is a world of not just yes to everything. Yes, it's all one. Yes, it's all, the navigation is yes and no, yes and no. The actual navigation of day-to-day life, the actual navigation. Yes, we have those experiences when we're blown open into the cosmic state of complete and total, openness and oneness and this type of thing. But the practice has always been discerning through one's yes and one's no, discerning in one's ability to have boundary. And this boundary is important whether you're talking about one's spiritual practice. It's important whether you're talking about, one's family and like what your kids are exposed to and this type of thing, and where you allow them space to just run around and be themselves and where you put limits on them. Like it's important everywhere, every step of the way. It's a navigation of porosity and boundary, porosity and boundary.
When you're speaking to a quality of health, right? There's that's a healthy boundary that allows in what you want to allow in, allows things to pass through, and says no to the things that it doesn't want. And then, in a big part of my work in doing physical practices is helping rebuild consent and rebuild choice and rebuild that semi-permeable boundary in the body. And, some people need to learn how to open and some people need to learn how to close. And then there's like this, there's the both and.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And some people need to learn how to close certain areas and open others.
Right.
And other people need to learn how to close areas and open others. There are overarching tendencies, and there are areas of my life where I feel like I have really good boundary. And there are areas of my life where I feel like I'm not open quite enough. And then there are other areas of my life where I feel that I'm too open. Like this last year in my work life, I've been really working with boundary. And that's been incredibly important. And so just because someone might be open in one way doesn't mean that there aren't other places where they could open up and other places where they could use more boundary. And, this is literally in the body, this is a cellular process. This is cell by cell by cell. Every atom, every cell does this dance of porosity and boundary. And, some say it's the absolute heart of spiritual practice, really.
This is a big, it's a big one for me. So of course I do this for my work, but there's also what's conscious and then there's what's not conscious. And so the work that I'm doing while I'm asleep, like what I'm engaging in, because it's my unconscious, what I'm, habitually drawn to do is very different than what I might have the discernment to do in my conscious waking life.
Yeah.
Right? And then what my body is susceptible to through either like in a sleep state.
Yeah. And that's another reason why I think that regular access to states of consciousness that aren't just our linear beta wave engagement with the cosmos are really important.
Yeah.
The more we are in states of flow and dream states, and there is something else that gets worked with and fed, and the whole picture of what the body is gets crystallized and developed in those states, that we can't meet life just in the day-to-day mundane thinking beta brainwave state of existence.
Yeah.
Our ancestors did not meet life that way. They had enough time out in nature and enough repetitive rhythmic activities to take them into flow states, enough times when they did ritual and enough times when they fasted, either voluntarily or involuntarily, enough ways of getting into those deep states of what Tyson Yunkaporta calls ancestral mind. Like, we can't think that we're going to navigate this life just by thinking our way through it. It has to come through the dream state. It has to come through the flow state. It has to come through all of these expanded states of being.
So when I think of how trauma lives in the body, like whether it's a developmental trauma ongoing or a traumatic event, there's a stopping of energy. There's a contraction around breath. And some people get stuck in that. They get stuck in that narrative, and then they tell that victim narrative their whole lives. And how can people shift from, like, using the framework of the hero's journey, shift from that as their primary orientation, almost like compulsively telling that story, to living life perceiving that they have more choice and they have more access and and more awareness in seeing the unfolding of their life as myth.
Yeah, I mean, that's a deep question.
I know.
It's
hard. It is. I just have to say, like, it is hard because each of your amazing episodes is 2 hours long, and I could literally I could have a whole hour conversation on one sentence. And so trying to pick like just a few, you could do a whole episode. You already have pretty much done a whole episode.
Yeah, I mean, I did that episode called On Trauma and Vegetation Gods a few years ago, and it went into this. And, and I like deep questions, by the way.
Yeah,
Very deep questions, cosmic questions. Yes, I like these things. But I think, like, first of all, it's important to recognize that trauma isn't just one thing. Trauma isn't easily identifiable as one thing. And yes, in certain cases of like particular types of trauma, there can be symptom sets that are important to address, like as, okay, this is the symptom set that is associated with, this type of experience. But what I mean when I say trauma isn't just one thing, I mean, if we think back to painful experiences in our life or, was what came of that just one thing? Was it easily identifiable as like, oh, everything since then has been quote unquote bad? I mean, you can think of it, this relates to our previous discussion on culture disruption. Trauma is a type of culture disruption, right? And it's not quote unquote bad. It is something that is going to affect the growth pattern of the tree from then on out. It's going to change the way that the tree spirals and the way that the lattice work patterns of trunk growth form and this type of thing. So I looked at a, forest of old gnarled cedars and I said it was hard to tell what was the trauma and what was the tree, right? Like, we are our patterns. We are what are, and don't take this the wrong way. I don't mean we have to self-identify with them, but I mean when we look at like, the growth patterns, and we are expressions of patterns that crystallize in certain ways based on life experience. And that is somatics too, like understanding that. And the myths are full of stories of, especially the Greek myths, are full of stories of beings that go through traumatic experiences, but then paradoxically end up birthing beauty from that traumatic experience. And you have many people, I mean, you were talking about that porosity and that kind of sensitivity and ability to perceive and this type of thing. Well, a lot of people, that gift is born through some type of traumatic quote unquote experience. And this exists in my own family. I've seen it firsthand. And where like one's ability to be an oracle or tapped into the deeper energies at play, well, that came from a kind of particular type of trauma. Ritual harnesses kind of traumatic experience all the time. Many shamans have gone through deeply, traumatic things in order to get to be shamans and gain that sight and facility of working with the spirit world. So I think the first thing is that we have to, depolarize or expand our vision of trauma a little bit and not see it as the thing that lives in us that we need to extract at all costs. Like, have you extracted your trauma or not? Right? Like, it can't be extractive because it's not a thing that we can extract. It is part of a tapestry of being that is very intricate, and, pain and joy mingle in very hard to pin down ways, and this is life. Now, within that, are there things that we are called to repattern? Yes, there are things that we are called to repattern. Now, how do we do that? Well, one way to do it is, through what you can call kind of a modern Western psychological approach. And there's people for whom this is incredibly helpful and has been very helpful. But I do offer some critiques of that approach, not saying that people like shouldn't do it, but just because I think it's important to investigate things. And, one of my critiques of that approach is what you're talking about, which is that a person can become kind of, on the one hand, a person could be, reviled by that, thing that is viewed, that trauma that is viewed as a thing, and want to like extract it and get rid of it. And on the other hand, a person can become attached to it, and they can become, oh, my story is so bound up in this thing, I am this thing and this is me. And both sides of that are fairly individualist, and a fairly individualist way of working with it. And repatterning happens in many, many ways. Repatterning, yes, it can happen through, talking about it in a therapeutic context. It can also happen through, like we're talking about, having a ritual calendar and having a somatic practice that even if you're not consciously aware of what you're repatterning and like labeling it like I'm going into this full moon ritual as like trauma work, you will find that things are being repatterned. You will find that having that type of ritual engagement starts to repattern. In modern Western tradition, we always want to name the thing and extract the thing. And it's like, it's like a colonial attitude towards our trauma, basically. Like, and to look more deeply at what repatterning means over the long seasonal cycles of time in our lives. And, what is a practice that, starts to establish the patterns that I want to establish in this life, the practices of reweaving, that will start to address all of those hidden traumas. And it doesn't always have to be a conscious excavation process. It doesn't always have to be like, now I am going to go into that thing that happened when I was exactly this age, and I'm going to extricate all the darkness from that exact thing. And, sometimes it can appear that way or happen that way, but quite often it doesn't. Quite often it's through repatterning, reweaving. And I can't also say enough about the importance of community in all this. It's like, if we are just the solo questing hero that is going to take on that trauma, well, community, when we repattern and reweave in community, then we have a web, a system that is actually able to hold more of our burdens and more of our, places where we're still working to transform, and all this. It becomes held in a different way, and taking the lens off of us a little bit can be deeply healing. And, it's like Western psychological history has gone through an interesting journey, because of course, like when Freud started, in an individualist culture with people whose voices had been silenced for many, many years and weren't encouraged to express themselves or have anything related to feeling at all, to have a individual outlet to say, no, your feelings are important, and acknowledging what you're going through is important. Like, that obviously is very, very important. But then it can also spiral into kind of a deeply individualist exercise that can end up, putting even more pressure on the individual and reinforcing patterns within the individual. And so, to me, there is hopefully a natural progression to start to work communally around things, and to start to work somatically around things and ritually around things, because I ultimately feel the people that I've been around that I feel are really, good examples for me of what this kind of repatterning looks like are people who are deeply embedded in communal and ritual structures. I think there is a trap that we can get into when it's too individualist in nature.
Thank you. I run a group, a co-ed somatics group, and it's a practice group. And honestly, if I could do, and I see individual clients all day, but if I could do groups like that all day, if time permitted, people's work schedules allowed, that's what I would do. It's so profound and so tender. And because we're doing so many physical, like hands-on practices, what opens in someone, and then I'm working with them individually too, and so I get to weave what opens in the group, that then continues to open in them individually, getting to simultaneously be the receiver of something, like being in it, being a support, being a bystander, or being a witness. It's like getting to be in all of those roles in one evening is so potent for people. And the deep compassion and the transformation that happens vicariously, I wish that everybody had that access. I really do. It's so tender. I
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever, and I also love your work boundaries. I would love if you could guide us through a brief practice. And I didn't even get to talk to you about your first love, which is music, and the use of sound, which has been huge, like the use of chanting and what that can open in our bodies. And I'm just wondering if there's something maybe around that or any practice that you'd like to guide us through.
Mm. Well, related to music, sound, vibration,
Mm-hmm.
the power of story and the power of ritual has always been deeply intertwined with the power of sound and vibration. To actually be able to take human beings on a journey and to, a tangible journey in which we actually feel. And so there's a reason that spoken word and uttered sound and chant and song have been such an integral part of ritual reconnection forever. And as far as a practice goes, the simplest of all possible practices in this day and age, which I feel is really helpful, is to take a moment and connect with the breath. And in particular for this practice, to connect to the phase of the breath called the exhale. And really feel it start to dissolve away any buildup. So if there's been buildup today, if there's been accumulation of thought and thought patterns and agitations and to-do lists on top of to-do lists starting to pile up, to simply take a moment and to let that dissolve with the exhale. So that each exhale, you're letting another layer dissolve. And this is important, the recognition of dissolution as one of the primal pulses, one of the primal energetics of the cosmos is important in a day and age when we're very focused on building and doing and producing. Dissolution is a vital part of the cycle. And the myths and stories are full of people who come apart and collapse into a heap on the forest floor. And sometimes even their skin slides off their bones. Their bones themselves crumble. They melt. They are washed away. There's a process of elemental dissolution that is told in Indian stories, a process that happens in the body with every breath, and it happens at the moment of death, and it happens eventually to the entire universe, and it's called Pralaya. It's called the Great Dissolution. And element by element, we dissolve. The earth element crumbles, the solid structures crumble, and then the rains wash all that away. And then the fire burns up everything that's left and reduces it to a fine powdery ash. And then the wind comes, the breeze comes, and it blows that ash away. And we are left basking in in-between space, in void, where we are not urging forward or hanging back, not thinking about what's to come, not reaching for anything, not thinking about what we're doing next, but simply letting ourselves steep in this mythic womb space, the space in between, the space in between universes, the space in between thoughts, the in-between space. And here in the in-between space, now that we've let things dissolve a little bit, here we can open up our hearts to listen. Here we can listen for the voice of the world, which is always singing. The voice of the world is always uttering. It's simply that we don't stop and listen. Let's take a breath in and a breath out, and close with, in this listening space, in this space of deep listening, close with gratitude and thankfulness for the great mystery, for the source of life.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They're tears of gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for spending this time with me.
Yeah. Great to spend some time together. And thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful to have a conversation, and look forward to deepening conversation over the years.
I would love that. And I just want to express gratitude to you. I've introduced a number of people to your podcast, and they're in your course right now, and it's really transformational for them. And I love knowing that you've created such a strong web and community that's holding people so well.
Thank you.
And in closing, I want to make sure people know how to find you.
Yeah, the podcast is called the Emerald Podcast, and it's pretty easily findable on all podcast platforms. And the course that I teach is called The Mythic Body, and it's a year-long deep dive into mythic and animate tradition, full of practices like the ones we just did, and myth and story, really all designed to help us cultivate practices and ways of reconnection. And it's also a really thriving community, and there's lots of people sharing story and knowledge and interacting on the platform. So that can be found at themythicbody.com/courses. That's the easiest way to find it. And yeah, those are some of the things I've got going on. All are welcome.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. What a treat. If you enjoyed it, please like, rate, review, and share with your friends so that others can find me and like-minded folks will find each other. If you'd like to stay connected, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Laid Open Podcast. That's LAIDOPENPODCAST. And you can read more about my work at passionatelife.org, or go onto my website, charnacassell.com, to check out my course or my book, Pathways to Peace. This has been Laid Open Podcast. I'm your host, Charna Cassell. We all have different capacities, but I believe in our capacity to grow and change together.